Right now, as you sit there probably wondering if you should have spent that extra $10 on the premium coffee this morning, the foundation of the American empire is being liquidated by 7 guys in a Ryan boardroom who didn't even have the decency to invite you to the meeting. We are standing on the edge of the greatest wealth incineration in human history, where the $7 trillion petrodollar system, the literal life support machine for your lifestyle, just snapped like a cheap plastic fork at a billionaire steakhouse. For 50 years, every single barrel of oil sold on this planet was priced in US dollars, creating an artificial demand that allowed Uncle Sam to print unlimited money and export our inflation to everyone else, while we lived on borrowed time and, even more, borrowed money. But in 2025, that shield has officially vanished. The global dominance of the dollar is dying in real time, moving toward a new economic reality that's going to leave the unprepared holding nothing but very expensive, very useless wallpaper. This isn't some slow burn conspiracy theory. It's a mathematical certainty that began in 1971 when Richard Nixon severed the dollar from gold and realized he needed a new trick to make the world accept our growing pile of IOUs. To understand why your grocery bill is currently attempting a moon landing, we have to go back to the original sin of 1971. Before then, the dollar was as good as gold, which meant you could actually trust the paper in your wallet to be more than just a colorful promise from a professional liar. But Uncle Sam started spending money like a sailor on shore leave, funding massive projects at home and endless wars abroad, until the rest of the world started asking the uncomfortable question of whether we actually had enough gold to back up our hubris. When the French started sending ships to New York to collect their physical gold, Nixon did what any gentleman in a quarter would do. He cheated. On August 15, 1971, he temporarily suspended the gold backing, and 54 years later, we're still waiting for that temporary measure to end. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of a government that was already broke and looking for an exit strategy. The answer to this existential crisis was a gentleman's agreement with the devil in 1974. Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia with a proposal that would define the next half-century of global power. He convinced the House of Saud to price oil exclusively in dollars in exchange for military protection and a steady supply of American weapons, creating a brilliant, albeit slightly evil, monopoly that forced every nation on Earth to buy our currency just to keep their lights on. This created what economists call exorbitant privilege, allowing America to rack up a staggering $36 trillion in national debt without ever facing the consequences because the rest of the world acted as a giant, unwilling sponge for our excess printing. We exported our inflation to every corner of the globe, and in return, they sent us their physical goods and their hard work, while we gave them ink, paper, and a thank you note that was basically an IOU we never intended to pay. However, the sponge is officially full, and the Saudi royals have decided they've had enough of our protection and our lecture-heavy foreign policy. In 2023, they quietly let it be known they wouldn't be renewing the exclusive petrodollar arrangement, and by now, the divorce is final. They've joined the BRICS alliance and started flirting with the Chinese yuan and Indian rupees, which is the geopolitical equivalent of your spouse of 50 years moving out and immediately being seen at dinner with the guy you hate from the gym. This shift isn't just a political snub, it's a structural failure of the global financial plumbing that has kept the American dream on life support. When the world no longer needs dollars to buy oil, all those trillions of dollars we printed will come flooding back to our shores like a massive monetary tsunami. The smart money, the billionaires who actually pay for the seats at the tables you aren't allowed at, has already started the Great Escape. They're dumping paper and moving into gold, farmland, and hard assets because they know you can't eat a digital dollar when the system crashes. The party is ending, the lights are starting to flicker, and the bouncer is looking at his watch. If you think your bank is going to save you, you haven't been paying attention to the math. History is a cold-blooded teacher, and it says 80 years is the average lifespan of a reserve currency. We are currently at year 81. The dollar isn't just resting. It's a terminal patient, and the world is reaching for the plug. If the original sin of 1971 was the messy divorce, what comes next is the moment the neighbors start taking sides. And spoiler alert, they are choosing us and they definitely aren't bringing a casserole to the wake. For 50 years, the US dollar was the undisputed king of the hill, not because we were the most disciplined or the most virtuous, but because we were the only game in town with a big enough stick to make the rules. We weaponized the greenback, using the swift banking system like a financial velvet rope to decide who gets to party and who gets kicked out into the freezing night. But when the foreign reserves of global players were frozen in 2022, we didn't just punish a rival. We committed the ultimate cardinal sin of banking by proving that the safe haven was actually a trap. We sent a chilling message to every other country on the planet that your money is only yours as long as we like the way you vote and the way you pray. That was the Suez moment for the dollar, a massive neon sign flashing "Exit now" that triggered a global panic driven by the most basic human instinct, self-preservation. Enter the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the ragtag group of economies that Wall Street used to laugh at during overpriced cocktail parties. Well, nobody's laughing now, and the jokes have gotten remarkably unfunny for the suits in New York because that group has officially expanded to include heavy hitters like Iran, Egypt, and most importantly, the United Arab Emirates. These nations aren't just meeting to trade hummus recipes. They are building a parallel financial universe designed to make the American dollar as relevant as a floppy disk in a cloud computing world. They are creating a system where the dollar is no longer the middleman that takes a mandatory cut of every transaction. China and Brazil are now settling trades in their own currencies, and India is buying oil with rupees, which is the geopolitical equivalent of your local grocery store suddenly refusing to take your credit card and asking for chickens instead. This isn't just a trend, it's a structural demolition of the dollar's global demand, and every time a trade happens without a greenback, a little bit of our exorbitant privilege is buried in a shallow grave. Let's talk about the emperor's new clothes problem, which is currently the leading cause of insomnia for central bankers worldwide. The dollar is backed by nothing but confidence, and in the world of high finance, confidence is a fickle mistress who leaves the moment she smells even a hint of desperation. In the year 2000, roughly 73% of global foreign exchange reserves were held in dollars, but by 2024, that number plummeted toward 55% in a free fall that would make an Olympic diver jealous. In the world of reserve currencies, that's not a dip, that's a flat line. Central banks are diversifying out of dollars at the fastest pace since the end of the Second World War because they can see the $36 trillion debt mountain, and they know a debt that can't be repaid simply won't be repaid. Major players like China have dumped over $300 billion in U.S. treasuries in just a few years, trading their paper promises for physical, heavy, unhackable gold. They aren't stupid. They know that when the music stops, the guy holding the paper is the one who ends up sleeping on the floor. The U.S. government is currently in a terminal debt spiral, adding $1 trillion to our national debt roughly every 100 days. To the gentleman in the room who can still do basic long division, if your business was spending twice what it brought in while your biggest customers were actively building a rival shop across the street, you wouldn't be looking at a growth phase, you'd be looking at a bankruptcy filing. We've reached the point where interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. It's a giant global Ponzi scheme where the new investors, the rest of the world, are finally walking away from the table and taking their ball with them. The experts on the news will tell you the dollar is strong because it's up against the euro or the yen, but that's like being the most athletic guy in the iron lung. Being the best of a bad bunch doesn't help you when the whole hospital is being sold for scrap. Your savings aren't growing in that 401k. They're being diluted by a government that has no choice but to steal the value of your labor through the silent tax of inflation. They're hoping you're too busy arguing over politics to notice that the foundation of your house is being hollowed out and the brick's hammer is already mid-swing. Now, let's talk about the inflation tsunami, a term that the mainstream media loves to avoid because it's much easier to blame a war in a country you can't find on a map than it is to admit the house is on fire. For 50 years, the United States had a superpower that was better than any aircraft carrier or stealth bomber. We could print money, and the rest of the world had to take it. We exported our inflation like a bad habit, sending our greenbacks to foreign central banks where they sat in vaults, acting as the foundation for the global economy. This kept the prices at your local big box store artificially low and your standard of living artificially high, but that free lunch just hit the trash can. As the world de-dollarizes and countries start dumping their U.S. Treasury bonds, all those trillions of dollars are looking for a place to go, and they are coming home to roost in your checking account like a plague of locusts. This isn't just rising prices, it is the literal evaporation of the hours of your life you spent working, being stolen by a government that has no other way to pay for its decades of debauchery. If you've noticed that your middle-class lifestyle now costs what a luxury lifestyle used to, congratulations, you've officially been invited to the great wealth transfer. In the world of high finance, inflation is the ultimate gentleman's heist. It's a silent, invisible tax that takes from the man who saves and gives to the man who is already deep in debt, which is in this case the U.S. government. By making the dollar worth less every single day, the government is effectively shrinking the real value of its $36 trillion debt pile. The only problem is that they are shrinking your retirement, your savings, and your children's future right along with it. If you have $100,000 in a bank account, you might still see six figures on the screen, but that wealth is currently being incinerated at a rate that would make a Joker movie look like a documentary. You aren't earning 5% in a high-yield savings account when the actual cost of staying alive is rising by 15%. You are losing ground every time the sun comes up, and the people in the nice suits are counting on the fact that you're too tired from your second job to do the math. This brings us to the great wealth transfer, which is just a polite way of saying the biggest pump and dump in human history. When a currency fails, wealth doesn't just vanish into thin air, it simply changes hands. It moves from the paper world, the world of index funds, bonds, and digital promises, to the real world of hard assets that cannot be printed into oblivion by a guy in a basement in D.C. The billionaires aren't buying the dip in the S&P 500, they are buying the dirt under your feet and the gold in the ground. They are moving their chips off the table while telling you to stay the course and trust the process. It's the same logic of the captain of the Titanic telling the third-class passengers that the water in the hallway is just a minor plumbing issue while he lowers his own lifeboat into the sea. The 35 to 50-year-olds in the room know exactly how this feels, because we've seen this movie before, in 2000 and 2008, and we know that by the time the all-clear signal is given, the vault is already empty. The irony of the whole situation is that the more the dollar dies, the more successful the stock market looks on paper. When the currency loses half its value, the price of a stock should, in theory, double just to stay even. But that's not growth. That's a funeral procession in a tuxedo. We are living through a crack-up boom, where people are frantically trading their dying paper for anything that has a pulse or a physical presence. The Magnificent Seven tech stocks are the final safe haven for a world that has nowhere else to hide. But even a safe haven becomes a trap when everyone tries to squeeze through the same door at the same time. We are watching the consolidation of global wealth into the hands of a few tech overlords and asset managers who will own the real world while you are left holding a digital wallet full of Fed coin that has an expiration date and a social credit kill switch. The gentleman's game has become a street fight, and the first rule of a straight fight is realizing that the referee is on the other team's payroll. So, here we are, gentlemen. The lights are dimming, the band has packed up their instruments, and the exit doors are being guarded by men who certainly don't have your best interests at heart. The petrodollar didn't just die, it was murdered by the very hubris that built it, leaving an entire generation to pay for a party they weren't invited to. You can choose to believe the all-is-well lullabies from the talking heads on your television, or you can look at the math and realize that the 2026 reset isn't a theory, it's a scheduled event. The magnificent era is over, and the era of the survivor has begun. Whether you end up being the one holding the bag or the one holding the assets is entirely up to you. History is moving fast, and as the old saying goes, the best time to find an exit was 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now, before the bouncer decides the club is officially closed. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Cinematic Empire Tales if you'd rather see the truth coming than be blindsided by it in the dark. We'll see you in the next one if the lights are still on.